It's brilliant. So that actually, it's like one of those, in a Persian carpet, you have sort of wrong. You make a mistake.
Yeah.
There is a mistake.
When you replicate it on stage, do you play the mistake?
No, we don't.
How are you?
I'm good, thank you. Great to be here.
Lovely. How's touring? How's touring life for someone who I would imagine up until now may have had a very solitary music-making existence? How's touring life?
It's interesting. I really enjoy it. Playing live to an audience is, in a way, like the most maybe authentic musical experience. It's that one-to-one, real-time conversation. And you learn so much about what you've made by the way people respond to it, the way you connect to it. So, yeah, I really love it.
The record is largely about polarities and polarization between us. Could you tell us more about that?
Yeah, you're right. This is the big theme of our culture at the moment, isn't it? How people with, who maybe feel differently about things can sort of talk to one another. And this principle of polarity is something I wanted to kind of, in a way, model a fruitful way to resolve that in a creative work, in a musical piece. So I put together things which are very different. So electronic music, instrumental music, found objects, composed music, the natural world, the human world. Put those together into the same space and to try to make something kind of more than the sum of the elements out of them. So it's an attempt to kind of reconcile those polarities in a creative way.
The idea being that these found music and through composed music, music that's performed in an instrument and the sounds of the outside, the sounds of children are playing, we would think of these as diametrically opposed.
Yeah, traditionally we would, yeah.
And by putting them together, you the hope is to show that these, oppositional things can come together.
Yeah, and actually you can get a kind of a richer situation, a more like multi-dimensional, a deeper situation, a deeper experience from like embracing, I guess, things which feel, like they're very different.
Where did this idea come to you? Why was this on your mind?
It just comes, if we look around the world at the moment, this is the big theme. And I think obviously, in a way, amplified by our media culture to some extent. The sort of online space, which very much, by its nature, in a way, amplifies a kind of maybe slightly histrionic kind of discourse.
I might add that there's a financial incentive in tech worlds to make short form content that would amplify us and get our adrenaline rushing.
Exactly.
And all that stuff
It's all driven by sort of hormones and dopamine and fight or flight stuff. It's very sort of. So anyway, I thought creative work, a piece of music, as a space to reflect on that situation and maybe model a better outcome, a better set of relationships between these oppositions.
I want to play somehow the last track on the album right now. This is called Movement Before All Flowers. That's Movement Before All Flowers from Max Richter's latest album, In a Landscape. Not originally the last track on the record, is my understanding.
Yeah, so originally the last track on the record was the love song After J.E., which ends, if you like, in darkness. And when I was sequencing the record, putting it together in a bit more detail, I thought, I don't really want to end in that place.
Why not?
I don't want to end in darkness. I want something which points in a way beyond itself, something which offers the opportunity for new things. And this piece, Movement Before All Flowers, ends in a kind of, maybe a sort of a hopeful question mark. So it's a sort of slightly unresolved but brighter ending. And I think it points to kind of potential.
one of the things that this is bringing up for me in just listening to the record and getting ready for this conversation, both in form of having, found music versus through composed music, electronic instruments versus, handmade instruments, as sort of a representation of how different polarities can come together and be in dialogue with one another. But when we were talking about the media environment that we're in that leads to this polarization, I would also argue that it's one of like adrenaline. It gives you this adrenaline. It activates this fight or flight.
Yeah.
And while I was listening to this record, it struck me that it also forced me to turn off that part of my body.
Okay.
To be a little calmer and to listen a little bit deeper.
Yeah.
I'll just offer that out.
Yeah. I mean, I think the architecture of the music and this sort of alternating structure between, if you like, tracks and found objects, which are called life studies, because they are taken from life. I think
kids' conversations and feet on pavement and stuff.
All kinds of everything.
Yeah.
It's just almost like little audio journals. I guess that invites a sense of, once you start to listen to it, in a way you know what's coming next, or you know a version of what's coming next. So, a piece of music will end and you think, oh, yeah, so here comes a life study. And the life study ends and you think, oh, yeah, here comes some music. And it's sort of, I like this thing of the possibility of a piece of music offering, in a sense, a world that a world that has a kind of a familiarity. You might even say a kind of existential safety. Of course, we don't always want that. Sometimes we want music to provoke and sort of ask questions. But right now, at this moment, in this time, I feel like a piece of music which, in a sense, models or offers this kind of existential safety is, it's what I wanted to do.
I want to play you another piece of music, and it's not one of yours.
Okay.
Nice to hear a hit every now and then, hey?
Wow.
Hilary Hahn.
What a banger.
Bach's double violin concerto, or I think it's actually called the violin concerto, the concerto for two violins. A formative piece of music for you, am I right about that?
Yeah, actually. When I was a kid, my parents had a few records. They weren't musicians, but they had famous classical records, Beethoven 5, La La La, Mozart 40, and this. And it blew my mind, actually. So
what do you mean?
Well, so this goes back to when we were still living in Germany. So this was before I was maybe 3, because we moved when I was 3. And I remember sitting in the apartment and this record coming on, and having this amazing sort of overwhelming sort of sensation, very multidimensional, which was sort of to do with the way the sunlight was falling into a room, and this music sort of fused together. And then the sensation that, of course, great melody, very full of drama and everything, but this, in a way, intuition that there was something behind these sounds, which was sort of governing the way that they interacted, that there was a grammar. And I was like, there's a grammar.
There's something there's order.
I want to understand this. And it really lit the fuse for me. I was like, yeah, now I want to know how to do that. Which obviously took years.
There's also a story I heard that there was a Milkman.
Oh, yeah. The Milkman. He's a really important figure in my life.
Tell me.
So
your parents weren't musicians. Your parents, they didn't have an extensive record library necessarily.
No, but I was, I was passionate about music through my childhood. I was just 2 or 3 formative experiences. So I was, having piano lessons as a kid, as you do. And I would practice the piano in the afternoons, doing my Mozart, Beethoven, or whatever it is. And at that time, being a milkman was a job which a lot of artists did, writers, painters, musicians, because you only had to work early in the morning, and then the rest of the day you get basically time to do your art. So perfect job for an artist.
I have artist friends who work in the post office.
Right,
for that
exactly.
to deliver
exactly
mail
the
in the
same.
morning. Yeah.
So this guy would come once a week to get paid. My mum would write a check for him, and they'd have a little chat and he'd be around. And he heard me practicing, and he thought, oh, this here's somebody who's into music. And he was somebody who had a lot of kind of experimental music records, and he'd come to the States a lot, and he had like early Philip Glass on the Point label, and like Cage and Terry, all kinds of amazing stuff.
He was into 20th century contemporary classical music?
Yes,
Yeah, okay.
exactly. And sort of all the downtown scene as well, New York downtown scene. So he started dropping these records off with the milk in the morning. So I was hearing stuff which, you know, you just couldn't hear because there was no internet. I was living in Hickville, you know. I mean, I had no opportunities to hear this stuff. And suddenly I was hearing this music, which was available on, you know, a private label in New York, which this guy had picked up. So I heard some amazing things, and it really sort of lit the fuse.
You dug it? Like, did you?
Yeah.
Like, as a young, if you're playing Mozart and Beethoven on the piano, and, you know, when I was reading about you, it's a lot of Beatles records at the house. All very tonal, all very tonal. And I remember when I remember when I got to music school and my friends started playing me Cage and my friends started playing me Philip Glass. I did bristle a little bit at first, you know. I started going like, what, you know, but you dug it right away?
Well, for me, I mean, this is, I guess, when I was 13, 14. So I had, in a way, you know, the pop music around me at the time was punk, new wave, and also like for me, new music was like Stravinsky.
Okay.
You know? So I'd kind of, you know, in a way I'd sort of heard all the kind of standard options in a way, you know, the canon in a way.
Yeah.
So new music is Stravinsky, even though it's like 80 years ago.
Yeah. But it caused a riot.
Exactly. So I was like, what is this? So, you know, I heard, for example, music changing parts, you know, which is like a 4-hour sort of quite ambient, almost, people viewed it at the time as kind of new age almost, you know. And I heard it in a way through the lens of some of the electronic music I'd got to know, because I fell in love with Kraftwerk and some of the other electronic things around that time as well. So all these things sort of came together. And I thought, wow, there's another way to write music, because at the time the orthodoxy was you must write atonal music because that is the historical moment we're in, you know.
Yeah.
It's Boulez or nothing. You know?
Writing tonal music is kind of lame.
You're an idiot. Yeah. You can do it, but it makes you an idiot.
Yeah. Or a sellout or something
right,
like that.
Exactly.
Yeah, right.
So, you know, for me to hear Glass and some of the other sort of tonal, post-minimal things, like, you know, I also heard John Adams around that time. I was like, this is a really interesting.
Well, we had John Adams in that not that long ago. And what's interesting is that there is a tension between wanting to make the music that you want to make and the commercial requirements of just trying to make a living.
Yeah.
I read the story about you that I found really interesting. So you put your first record out, A Memory House, in 2002. You said, but no one listened to it and no one bought it, and that was incredibly freeing. What does that mean?
Well, yeah, it was an interesting one because, you know, Memory House came along. I'd written the record without any expectation of anyone ever releasing it. I'd written it because Yulia, my wife, said, stop moping around the house and complaining. You just need to go and make something.
Sure.
And so I did. So I wrote this record, and, you know, like all first albums, you know, you put your heart and soul into it, and then what? So miraculously, the BBC had this radio show, Late Junction, who had a label for like about 10 minutes, and they had put out 2 or 3 records, one of which was Memory House. But they weren't a record label, really. So, you know, there was no advertising, no reviews, no promotion, They released it, technically, yes.
Yeah.
But that, you know, you could buy it if you knew about it.
Yeah, right.
So
it was a secret.
So it was a secret, yeah. So really nothing happened with the record at all, apart from, you know, like other composers heard it, other, you know, friends of friends of friends of friends. You know how these tiny ripples happen.
Yeah.
But, you know, my life didn't change. I was still like, you know, sort of rather, in a way, at a loose end, not knowing quite how to make a life in music. You know, I'd done this thing. I was happy with it creatively. But, yeah, you know, no one paid attention really. And I thought, actually, that's okay, because it means no one's listening. So I can just, in a way, continue making this stuff and no one will listen, and that will be fine.
Well, then,
kind of please myself, you know.
but I think again we can skip to you becoming the most listened to composer in the genre, and to do that, let's talk about the Blue Notebooks. So let's play a piece from it, and it's the one. What are you laughing at?
I'll tell you in a bit.
Should I be listening for something?
There's so I did this on Fat Cat. We had enough budget for one 3-hour session in the studio, and what you're hearing there is actually the band's sight reading.
No, really?
They are playing that for the first time, which, I mean, they're great players. They're great players. But what's fantastic is right near the beginning of that, Phil, one of the cellists, actually plays a wrong note.
Oh, wow.
He plays an E flat instead of a G flat. And because it's 6 flats, you know, it's a kind of key that string players hate.
Yeah.
But anyway, so it's brilliant. So that actually, it's like one of those, you know, in a Persian carpet, you have sort of wrong, you make a mistake.
Yeah.
There is a mistake.
When you replicate it on stage, do you play the mistake?
No, we don't.
Sorry, Phil. That is of course on the Nature of Daylight, a piece of music that's found on so many soundtracks over the years. Arrival, Shutter Island. I think it does tie back to the record we started talking about, which is the new record. And if you really think about it, if I want to get nerdy, I could say it ties to Cage and Steve Reich. Like in that, it's music, it's instrumental music about something in our real world.
Yeah.
Written in the lead up to the Iraq War. That's right.
Yeah.
What was the?
Well, so obviously, you know, the political situation had been sort of brewing for some time, and they'd been building this narrative to do the Iraq invasion, based really on a kind of a fantasy story, you know. It wasn't really anything to do with facts. It was just like, we're going in and now we need some reasons. And, you know, I remember the week before the recording, you know, we'd been on these big marches, and there was this sort of feeling that sort of geopolitics was departing from reality and turning into this kind of branch of fiction, where, you know, the great powers could sort of behave as they wanted, in spite of the fact that the UN and various other people were sort of saying you can't do that. So in a way, it's a protest album. You know, I think of it really just sort of connecting into, you know, that tradition of sort of, you know, Woody Guthrie and also punk, and, you know, just actually a record responding to the world of that moment.
But Woody Guthrie can say, this land is your land, this land is my land. You know, John Lydon can say, you know, God save the Queen, her fascist regime. This is instrumental music.
Yeah.
How can instrumental music be protest music? Big question, I know.
It is a big question. I mean, in a way, there's like two things. The first is that I included spoken word readings to kind of frame it. And I, rather than sort of going directly into the subject, like please don't invade Iraq, I thought about the principle of doubt and the principle of, you know, what is truth and what's happening to truth in this situation. And therefore I was thinking about Kafka, who sort of really interrogates meaning, and he's all about doubt. So I thought, okay, so Kafka's going to be my guy here. So I, you know, used these fragments of Kafka and also some fragments of Czeslaw Milosz, a couple of other things, which kind of, they speak a bit more directly to the idea of war in a way. And I guess the other thing is that I lent very much into what I was feeling and what a lot of other people were feeling. And I do think music is an art form about feeling. You know, of course it's it's kind of a brainy thing. It's conceptual, but it's really about feeling.
It's really about feeling.
That's what it is, right?
Yeah.
So it's a way for us to experience how another person is feeling, which I think is one of the really magical things about it.
I mean, two things come to mind. One is that great Frank Zappa line that talking about music is like dancing about architecture, which I don't fully agree with, but I do understand the sentiment behind it. The other thing that comes up is that, and I hope you take this in the spirit in which I mean it, is I think it requires a lot of hope, actually, and a lot of belief in humanity to offer something without words that you believe as an honest offering from you will create the conditions for them to think that as well.
Yeah, I mean, I do, in a sense, maybe this is sort of naive, but I do have kind of faith in music, if you know what I mean. That sounds maybe slightly crazy, but I do sort of believe in the potential of creative work to elicit changes in the world. I experience that in my own life. If I get out of bed in the morning, I'm making the coffee, I stick the radio on, and it's like the Eroica or something. My day's going to be a bit better. It just is 1% better. But I really believe in that 1%.
During the pandemic, I would try to listen to a great piece of music on the way to work every morning because everything was so bleak.
Yeah,
and I just needed something in the morning to make it better. And
yeah,
it worked out. This year also marks the 10th anniversary of your album Sleep, an 8.5-hour epic people were encouraged to have on as they slept. It has become the most streamed classical music album of all time. Well, I mean, aren't we talking about the same thing? But I'd love to hear more about the motivation behind that project because I've known about it for so long, but it's nice to talk to you about it.
The project has its roots in like 2013, 2014, and this is when 4G was making basically the whole internet available in our pockets for the first time, which meant we had social media 24/7. We had all the information in the world with us all the time, which is if you think about that, it's insane. But okay, so it happened.
It was supposed to be a great opportunity, actually.
Well, it's a great opportunity and also a great, in a way, burden, right?
Yeah.
And this is what, I was talking with Julia, my partner, and we were thinking about how creative works can, in a way, function as a kind of alternate reality. A big painting, if you look at a Rothko, you're immersed in it. It sort of takes you out of the world for a moment. A big novel or a movie, and also, an extended piece of music. It can function like a landscape that you inhabit. So we thought about this idea of like a piece of music as a kind of a pause or a holiday from this kind of 24/7 data blizzard. And so that's kind of the origins of Sleep. The other thing, I guess, is that, at that time I was touring a fair bit, and, Julia would often be listening in a different time zone in the middle of the night or whatever, and she had this experience of like being in this sort of boundary state, half awake, half asleep. And she was saying what's interesting about that is it's super emotional because you're sort of if you like, your executive bit of your brain is sort of away and you just sort of receive this sort of material in a more direct way. So those were a couple of ideas about, how the piece developed.
You held concerts where people could sleep or lie in a bed as they listened to the music.
Yeah.
Can you give me an example of some of the stories that people might have told you?
I think there's a few reasons for that. The piece works a lot on subsonics. It's got a lot of low end in it, and very deliberately.
Subsonics meaning
very low frequencies.
Yeah.
So
sort of unhearable, sort of?
Borderline unhearable.
Okay.
There's a lot of information around the sort of 50, 40, 30, 20 hertz area, which is, you feel it physically. So it kind of, in a way, it sort of lulls you. Neuroscientists would call it rhythmic entrainment. It sort of synchronizes your body's tempo in a way with the tempo of the piece. And the other thing is that the spectrum of the piece mirrors the spectrum that the unborn child hears in the womb. So because the mother's body filters out all of high frequencies, so this low frequency pulsing, which is at the heart of sleep, reminds us of something. It reminds us of something that we've all experienced even before we knew we were a person.
What did people tell you? What did they say to you afterwards?
I mean, a lot of people, it's very beautiful really to hear some of the things. We have, lots of people in sort of, nearing the ends of their lives. We have a lot of a lot of stories from people who are pregnant. There have been amazing things, like, I mean, we played it at the Great Wall of China a few years ago. And this was during the 75th anniversary of, I think, the Communist Party. It was kind of a big deal in China, Beijing Music Festival. We get to the venue and it's surrounded by soldiers with guns, really quite hardcore, scary security. We get into the venue and we start playing the show, and it's kind of stressful. Everyone's a bit freaked out by all of this. Yeah. So we start playing the thing, and after about 2 hours, I get a break for a coffee. And the strings are playing, so I wander off stage and I go around the back of the stage and I see all these soldiers with their guns asleep on the floor. There's just like dozens of them just sleeping. And I was just like, yeah, that's it. That's why we're doing this.
I did that.
It was amazing.
You're going to be weaponized by the government one of these days. They're going to. It was like a James Bond. Get it out of the loudspeaker. The new album, In a Landscape, is about, as we mentioned, polarities and our inability sometimes to find common ground. And we talked a little bit about the technological forces behind that polarization. I'm curious about how that intersects with your own creativity. I read a quote where you said everyone needs to develop their own strategies, whether that's taking time out of using systems to mute various apps, or leaving your phone at home, or changing your habits as an effort to escape these sort of polarities. Yeah. I also, when I was reading that you do sort of separate yourself from the rest of the world sometimes to compose in this sort of like Thoreau, Walden, existence. But that's not your everyday life. And that's, no one listening to this is everyday life. What are your strategies, especially when it comes to the mindset or space you need to compose? What do you do?
I guess the first thing that's happened is that we have moved out of the city. We are now in a kind of building in the woods. So, yeah, our lives are very technological in a way. I'm working with computers in the studio and all the time. And actually, I found that citing that in nature. So, I look out the window, I look away from the screen, I look out the window and there are trees. There's something bigger, something different, something else happening out there. That's really, really good news. So that's the first thing. And I guess the second thing is just being really thoughtful about, what is it you're trying to do? Why are you in that room? Why are you sort of getting out of bed in the morning? What is the plan? Because, as you said, we have a kind of limitless distractions, limitless notifications, limitless calls on our time and attention. I mean, attention is now the number one traded commodity, right? So we have to be very aware of that. And if we're going to give something our attention, we should it should be worthwhile.
Is the ideal listening experience for this record for someone to take it home and undistracted headphones?
I mean, that's the ideal, and that's how I made the record, to be listened through from, beginning to end. But I mean, I wouldn't want to legislate that, I mean, everyone listens through their own biography, and I think that's cool. So that meeting point actually is really interesting. When I made Sleep, I thought I was making a piece only to be experienced while sleeping. But, people, they go to the office, they put on Sleep.
They study to it.
They do coding all day, and then when it's finished, they go home. They've done their 8 hours. People do yoga, people study to it, people, use it in all kinds of settings. So.
And not to mention the on the nature of daylight, which that's been that came out of a certain emotion as well. Like we were talking about the Iraq War. It's in every, the context for that has changed as well.
Yeah, exactly. And actually it's interesting, because you learn so much about what you've made from that kind of situation. It's cool.
Like you learn that you don't have any control over how people take it in.
That's true. But also that's good, I mean, in a way of putting a piece of music out in the world is half of a conversation, right? And whoever's listening to it, they'll bring themselves, they bring their biography, and that's the other half of the conversation.
Just lovely to talk to you.
Thank you. Great to be here.
Thank you for coming in.
Okay.